What if the heart of Manhattan held secrets that could change everything in the blink of an eye? Inside Liberty Diner, where the warmth of red booths contrasts with the city's chill, the evening was winding down. For Maria Torres, a 30-year-old waitress whose quick wit brought smiles to weary faces, this modest eatery was her sanctuary amidst the chaos. But as the clock ticked closer to closing time, a mysterious encounter was about to unravel her world, revealing layers of intrigue hidden beneath the diner's comforting facade. It was usually the regulars who kept Liberty Diner afloat, an eclectic mix of blue-collar workers, retired teachers, and aspiring artists. They came for the coffee, the comfort food, and the camaraderie. For Maria, it was a predictable routine, a much-needed stability in her otherwise complicated life. Tonight, however, would be anything but predictable. Just before closing time, the bell above the door jingled, signaling a new customer. Maria glanced up from behind the counter, her smile faltering as her eyes landed on Donald J. Trump, one of the most polarizing figures in the world. He wasn't flanked by a security detail or paparazzi, which only added to the surreal nature of the moment. Dressed in a long black coat with his signature red tie slightly loosened, Trump looked more subdued than she'd ever seen him. He scanned the room briefly before choosing a booth in the back corner, away from prying eyes. Maria froze for a moment, her heart racing. She'd seen Trump on TV countless times, from his days on The Apprentice to his controversial presidency. He was a man who commanded attention wherever he went, but seeing him here, in this small diner, felt almost surreal. "Maria," her coworker Janice whispered, nudging her. "Are you seeing what I'm seeing?" Maria nodded, pulling herself together. "I'll take his order," she said, grabbing her notepad. She wasn't sure what she was feeling. Curiosity, nervousness, maybe even a hint of admiration. Regardless, she knew one thing. Trump was just another customer, and she had a job to do. Approaching his table, she put on her warmest smile. "Good evening, sir. What can I get for you?" Trump looked up, his expression thoughtful but kind. "Just a coffee," he said. "Black, and maybe a slice of apple pie if you've got it." "Coming right up," Maria replied, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. As she walked back to the counter, she could feel the eyes of the other patrons on her. Some were whispering, their voices tinged with disbelief and, in some cases, disapproval. Liberty Diner was no stranger to political debates, but the presence of someone as divisive as Trump was bound to stir up emotions. Maria poured the coffee and plated the pie, reminding herself to stay professional. Whatever her personal feelings about the man, he was still a customer. She brought the order to his table, setting it down with care. "Thank you," Trump said, giving her a small nod before turning his attention to the window. For the next few minutes, the diner settled into an uneasy quiet. Maria kept herself busy, casting the occasional glance at Trump, who seemed lost in thought as he sipped his coffee. But the tension in the air was palpable, and it wasn't long before it boiled over. At a nearby table, a group of young protesters had been watching Trump intently. One of them, a fiery young man named Ethan, finally stood up, his voice cutting through the quiet. "You've got a lot of nerve showing your face here," Ethan said, his tone laced with anger. The diner fell silent as all eyes turned to Trump. He looked up slowly, his expression unreadable. Maria's heart sank. She'd seen Ethan and his friends in the diner before. They were regulars, known for their passionate political debates. But this was something different. "Ethan, don't do this," Maria said softly, trying to diffuse the situation. But Ethan ignored her. "You think you can just walk in here like you're one of us? After everything you've done?" Trump set down his coffee cup, his gaze steady. "Son, I'm just here for a cup of coffee. Same as you." Ethan scoffed. "You don't get to play the everyman card, not after the damage you've caused." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Maria felt torn. Part of her wanted to stand up for her customer, while another part feared the backlash from the other patrons. Before she could say anything, Ethan's friend Sophie joined in. "You talk about making America great, but for who? People like you? Rich, powerful men who've never had to struggle a day in their lives?" Trump leaned back in his seat, his expression calm but serious. "I understand your frustrations," he said, his voice measured, "but attacking me here, in this diner won't solve anything. Let's have a conversation, not a confrontation. Ethan shook his head, his fist clenched. A conversation? With you? What's the point? You don't listen. You never have. At that moment, one of the older regulars, Mr. Jensen, a retired teacher with a reputation for being level-headed, spoke up. That's enough, Ethan. This isn't the place for this. But Ethan wasn't backing down. Why not? He needs to hear this. Someone has to hold him accountable. Maria felt a surge of panic as the situation escalated. She glanced at Trump, expecting him to react defensively, but instead he stood up slowly, his imposing figure commanding attention. I'm not here to cause trouble, Trump said, his voice firm but calm. I came here for a quiet moment, just like anyone else. But if you've got something to say, go ahead. I'm listening. The room fell silent, the tension hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Ethan seemed caught off guard by Trump's willingness to engage. For a moment he hesitated, his anger faltering. Maria held her breath, unsure of what would happen next. Just then, the door to the diner burst open, and a group of protesters who had been marching outside spilled in, their chants echoing through the small space. Maria's heart sank as the situation spiraled further out of control. Trump remained standing, his expression calm but resolute as the protesters surrounded his table. Maria knew she had to do something. Enough, she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. This is a diner, not a battleground. If you want to protest, fine, but do it outside. Right now, you're just scaring people. The protesters hesitated, their momentum disrupted by Maria's outburst. Trump looked at her, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. Ethan stepped forward, his voice softer now. We just want answers. We want to know why. Trump met Ethan's gaze, his expression earnest. I can't answer every question here tonight, but I'll tell you this. I believe in this country. I always have. And whether you agree with me or not, I'll keep fighting for what I believe is best for all of us. The room was silent as his words hung in the air. Maria felt a mix of emotions, relief, admiration, and something she couldn't quite name. As the protesters slowly began to file out, Maria let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Trump sat back down, his composure unshaken. Thank you, he said to Maria as she approached his table. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Just doing my job. But deep down, she knew tonight had been anything but ordinary. The aftermath of the protest felt like a slow-motion replay in Maria's mind. The night at Liberty Diner had been anything but routine, and as she lay awake in her small apartment, she couldn't shake the image of Donald Trump standing calmly in the face of chaos. It wasn't the kind of story she'd ever imagined being part of. Trump, polarizing as he was, had somehow managed to diffuse a situation that could have ended much worse. And yet Maria couldn't help but wonder what the long-term fallout would be for the diner, for her, and perhaps even for Trump himself. The next morning, Maria arrived at work to a mix of apprehension and exhaustion. She braced herself for the inevitable whispers and side glances from the regulars. But what she hadn't expected was the small crowd gathered outside the diner. Maria, shouted a familiar voice. She turned to see Janice waving her over. You're not going to believe this. What's going on? Maria asked, her voice wary as she approached the door. Janice gestured toward the street. Trump tweeted about us last night. Maria blinked. What? Janice pulled out her phone and handed it to Maria. On the screen was a tweet from Trump's official account. Visited a great little diner in NYC last night. Faced some heat but met a waitress, Maria, who reminded me of what this country is really about. Honesty, courage, and hard work. We need more people like her. Respect. Liberty Diner. Maria's jaw dropped. She read the tweet again, her heart racing. This can't be real, she muttered, but a quick search confirmed it. It's real, all right, Janice said, her voice filled with a mix of awe and amusement. And now everyone wants to know who you are. Maria glanced at the crowd outside, reporters with cameras and microphones, their faces eager for a soundbite. The sight made her stomach twist. She wasn't the kind of person who sought attention, and the idea of being thrust into the spotlight was overwhelming. Maria, called Mr. Bennett, the diner's owner, as he stepped out from the kitchen. You're famous now, and so is the diner. We've been getting calls all morning, people asking about the Maria special. She managed a weak smile. What's the Maria special? He chuckled. Apparently it's coffee and apple pie. We're putting it on the menu starting today. Maria couldn't help but laugh, though the sound was tinged with nervousness. She didn't know how to feel about all of this. The attention, the sudden fame, the idea that her simple act of standing up for someone had turned her into a symbol of something bigger. As the day went on, the diner was busier than Maria had ever seen it. Customers lined up out the door, many of them curious to see the place Trump had tweeted about. Maria did her best to keep up, her nerves settling as the familiar rhythm of work took over. It wasn't until mid-afternoon that things took another unexpected turn. The bell above the door jingled, and in walked Donald Trump, flanked by two bodyguards this time. The diner fell silent, every eye turning to him. Maria froze, her heart skipping a beat. Trump scanned the room, then smiled when he saw Maria. Mind if I sit at my usual table? He asked, his voice carrying a hint of humor. Maria found her voice after a moment. Of course, Mr. Trump. Right this way. She led him to the booth by the window, the same one he'd occupied the night before. As he settled in, the other customers began to murmur among themselves, their curiosity palpable. Maria brought him his usual order without being asked. Black coffee and a slice of apple pie. She set it down with a polite smile. Thank you, Maria, Trump said, his tone genuine. You're welcome, she replied, trying to ignore the butterflies in her stomach. For a few moments, Trump ate in silence, his presence commanding attention, even as he did something as mundane as sipping coffee. But then he looked up at Maria, his expression thoughtful. Maria, I want to ask you something, he said. She hesitated, her curiosity piqued. Sure, what is it? Trump leaned forward slightly. You stood up for me last night when you didn't have to. You didn't know me, and you had no reason to put yourself in the middle of that chaos. Why did you do it? Maria took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. I guess, I just didn't think it was right, the way they were treating you. Everyone deserves a chance to be heard, even if people don't agree with them. And honestly, I've been in situations where I felt judged before, and it's not a good feeling. Trump nodded, his expression serious. You're right, it's not. And what you did, it took guts. A lot of people talk about courage, but not everyone shows it when it matters. Maria felt her cheeks flush at the compliment. I was just doing what felt right, she said softly. He smiled. Sometimes that's all it takes to make a difference. As Trump finished his pie, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a business card. Maria, he said, sliding it across the table, I could use someone like you on my team. She stared at the card, her mind racing. Your team? He nodded. I run a lot of projects, businesses, charities, initiatives. I need people who are honest, hardworking, and willing to stand up for what they believe in. If you're interested, give me a call. We'll find something that fits. Maria blinked, struggling to process what was happening. I don't know what to say, she admitted. Say you'll think about it, Trump said, his smile reassuring. Opportunities like this don't come along every day. She nodded slowly, slipping the card into her pocket. I'll think about it. As Trump stood to leave, he turned to the rest of the diner, his voice carrying over the quiet hum of conversation. This is a great place, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. And Maria here, she's the real deal. You're lucky to have her. The room erupted into applause, and Maria felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment and pride. As Trump exited the diner, the bell above the door jingling behind him, Maria stood there in a daze. She glanced at the card in her pocket, her mind spinning with possibilities. The rest of the day passed in a blur, the diner bustling with energy and excitement. But as Maria lay in bed that night, staring at the card on her bedside table, she knew one thing for certain. Her life had changed in ways she never could have imagined.